Yes, I'm still upset over this finale, but I love this one, so let's compare them. Oh, Game of Thrones. You know, this was once revered as the greatest accomplishment in television history. It's a shame it took only about a month to destroy its entire legacy, kind of like Drake. There were many things that went wrong in the series finale, but I think it can be boiled down to at least 3 reasons. 1. The anticlimactic confrontation with the Night King. 2. The plot crammed about 3 seasons worth of story into 6 episodes. And finally, 3, which is probably the biggest for most people, the character assassinations. So many beloved characters like Jaime, Jon, Tyrion, Varys, Arya, and so on were butchered in one way or another, but I think the biggest victim of character assassination goes to none other than Daenerys Targaryen. She went from a confident leader set on freeing slaves and dethroning tyrants to willingly murdering tens of thousands of innocent people, including women and children, all because she was sad. It was a complete disaster of a final season, and one of the biggest butcherings of a character in television history. However, while Game of Thrones was destroying itself, HBO was working on another show that not only has come to be a darling child of every award show ever, but its finale is considered to be one of the best in TV, right up there with something like Breaking Bad, and that show is Succession. Both are very similar in that they deal with very smart people making decisions that affect the lives of millions, and it delivers a fantastic examination on the influences of power and what people are willing to do in order to achieve it. The difference is Succession stuck the landing because the characters, even though they do shocking things, made sense given their motivations, flaws, and inherent nature present since the beginning of the show. One character I want to analyze is Siobhan Roy. Her and Daenerys are very similar. Both have the disadvantage of being a woman in a male-dominated world, and they have a set of values for social justice. However, both of their greatest flaws come down to their lustful nature for power. Shiv's is a brilliantly written tragedy, while Daenerys is rushed and goes against everything the character stood for. So let's analyze this, starting with
Look at you, son. Look at what you've become.
I'm what you made me to be, father.
So Succession tells the story of billionaire media tycoon Logan Roy. He's an imposing and abusive figure to everyone around him, including his own family. However, he's reaching the end of his days and he's trying to find a successor for his company. While this is happening, his kids begin plotting and scheming in order to secure their spot as the successor of their father's company. One of the kids, Siobhan, is proven to be the most competent out of all the kids, but she's at a disadvantage because not only is she a woman in a male-dominated space, but she's also ideologically opposed to her father's conservative media company. At the start of the series, she becomes a political consultant for a Bernie Sanders-esque politician named Gil Avis. I think that's how you say it. He's hell-bent on taking down Logan and his company. She does this not only out of some spite against her father and his favoring of her brothers, Kendall and Roman, but she believes in Gil's values. Or so we think. In season 2, when her father offers his position to her, she pretty much immediately accepts the offer, showing us that not only has she just been wanting her father's approval this whole time, but she will drop her morals in a second if it means she can secure more power for herself. Fast forward through 2 seasons of plot, and it leads to a point where the 3 kids, now fed up with their father's behavior and actions, decide to make a plan and take him down. They all decide to work as a team, and this is probably the closest the siblings have ever been with each other. They're an unstoppable team. Then, out of nowhere, their dad dies, leaving it up to them to take over the company until a CEO is properly appointed. However, Roman and Kendall decide to make the decision without consulting Shiv to take over as a 2-man CEO. Shiv accepts this, but is clearly infuriated over their decision. A tech tycoon named Lucas is looking to buy the company, and she begins making plans with him to betray her brothers and secure a spot as CEO. Kendall and Roy find out about her betrayal and actively begin to work against her. The siblings are torn right now. However, the brothers get word that Lucas plans to back out on Shiv's deal. They tell her, and now they're at a standstill. They take all night, and after some deep sibling bonding, they collectively decide to let Kendall take over the company. She put aside her pettiness and decided what was best for the company and her family. There's a board meeting the next day to decide if they want to sell to Lucas. Kendall will have the majority vote, but he needs his siblings to vote him as successor. Rome votes in favor, but when it comes to Shiv, she freezes. She leaves the room and she falls back into her old ways. She'd rather sell the company than see either one of her brothers get power. It leads to the collapse of their relationship, and that's pretty much the end of the show. In their quest for greed and power, they ended up with nothing. Though it's not a typical downward spiral of moral corruption, it's more of a will she betray her values when it comes down to the end? And unfortunately, she does. It's a classic Shakespearean tragedy of sorts, but it works so well because even though it's a shocking betrayal from Shiv to do that, it's a decision that makes sense and is true to the essence of her character. She acts as the morally superior one of the family, but she's just as greedy and corrupted by the thought of power as the rest of them. Basically a champagne socialist. Now I just told you this whole recap because I feel the writers in Game of Thrones were trying to do something similar with Daenerys. At the last minute, even though she secured her place, she succumbed to her basic instincts out of frustration and a lust for power. She became mad. But wait, there's a key word I just said, and it's the reason why her arc doesn't work. And that's because of the conflict which I'm regarding as... So I'm well aware of the videos covering this very topic, but I want to add my opinion into the mix. I think the big flaw with Daenerys' character in the final season was the writers tried to convince the audience she had gone mad because of the bad stuff that happened to her. There's been tons of people saying what happened isn't a surprise. After all, they've been foreshadowing this side of her since the beginning. The biggest flaw in the argument, though, is that the writers weren't writing a madness arc for Daenerys. They set up a corruption arc. A madness arc is when a character begins to lose their sanity because of the choices they made over the course of the story. Jinx from Arcane is a perfect example. A corruption arc is when a character gives up on their moral values in the quest for whatever they want to achieve. Walter White from Breaking Bad is a perfect example. Both are under the umbrella of tragic arcs, but they aren't inherently the same thing. Since the beginning of the show, she's been very socially and morally conscious of the downtrodden because she herself was like them. She was sold off by her brother and treated like cattle. She understands to an extent the struggles of peasants and slaves. She vows to rid the world of it, and she thinks the ultimate way to achieve this goal is to reclaim her ancestral right to the Iron Throne. However, throughout the series, she not only begins to gain a savior complex, but she also begins showing signs of her more ruthless nature to achieve her goals. Even though most people she executed in the beginning tried to have her killed or were slave owners, she still nonetheless was brutal in her conquest. She'll let some in power live only if they bend the knee. If not, then she'll burn them alive with her dragons. Up until this point, though she's had some resistance from the people and former slaves, for the most part, everyone hails her as a savior, but it changes when she gets to Westeros. One of the first things she does when she's there is burn half an army because they didn't bend the knee. She's been ruthless to slavers and those in power, but the difference here is that the people in Westeros aren't in captivity, or at least not to the same degree as those in Essos. In the last 2 seasons of Game of Thrones, we see how Dany's tactics to free the oppressed won't work in Westeros because the last time they were in metaphorical chains, it was her family that ruled over. The Northerners don't trust her, the Southern Kingdoms don't trust her. She gets jealous of Jon's influence, and when she learns that he has a claim to the throne, her anger and jealousy deepens. It gets worse when she learns that one of her most trusted advisors was working against her and she burns him alive as punishment. She then takes her last remaining dragon and armies in the battle for King's Landing to finally take power away from Cersei Lannister, who she views as the ultimate tyrant. She defeats her army and Cersei. As of right now, the stage is set for her to fulfill a corruption arc. Most thought at this moment, at least I did, that she was going to ignore the signs of peace and just kill not only Cersei, but lay waste to her army. This is something I could see her realistically doing. But then, for no reason, she begins killing everyone in King's Landing. Not just the soldiers, but the women and the children too. This makes no sense. Even though she was brutal to those who opposed her, she would never willingly commit a mass genocide against people she perceived as innocent. But wait, I hear you say, she went mad, that's why she did it. Or you could say, but didn't you say the whole point of a corruption arc is the degrading of moral values? As I've explored earlier, she wasn't going mad over the course of the story. She was becoming corrupted in her pursuit of power. Her desire for the throne was beginning to outweigh her quest for liberation. situation. The choices that led her to this point, while there's a steady uprising in brutal tactics, are still logical in their reasoning. Her deciding to kill the people and then justify it with crazy eyes like, "Don't you see, Jon? I liberated them," makes no sense because she has never shown signs of going mad or illogical in her decision making. It's too unbelievable. The equivalent would be if in Succession, if it came down to the final meeting and it was Shiv's turn to vote, she pulled out an AR-15 and laid waste to the entire board and her brothers. Then she goes to Tom with crazy eyes saying, "I saved the company, Tom. Waystar is mine." This would be stupid because that would have been completely out of character for her. If I were to fix the final season of Game of Thrones, I couldn't, because that rewrite would take months of willpower and creativity that I simply don't have at the moment. So instead, I would try and rewrite Dany's character and see if we could come to a more justifiable place for what the writers, and to an extent, George R.R. Martin, was trying to accomplish with the main theme of the show, the corrupting nature of power. So in this rewrite, I'm going to try and fixate only on Daenerys and her arc into corruption. If I did a complete rewrite of where the series should have gone in the final season, this video would be hours long, and I wouldn't have made Daenerys end up corrupted to begin with. However, I want to try and make what George and the writers envisioned to life, and have it make more sense within the context of what they've built up in the show. So here goes nothing. Season 8 starts out and it's relatively the same, with Dany's armies coming to Winterfell for the long night. Only right now, tensions are high. The North is wary of this woman, her dragons, and her foreign armies taking control. Fights break out between the factions and people don't respect her like they do Jon. His sisters are very passive-aggressive to her as well. Over the course of the season, she becomes frustrated by everyone's disrespect and jealous over Jon's influence. It doesn't help when she finds out Jon is a Targaryen himself and has a claim to the throne. He claims he doesn't want it, but their relationship is essentially severed by Dany. She didn't experience everything she did, everything she sacrificed, all the humiliation, pain, and suffering for nothing. The Iron Throne is hers. She doesn't outright say it, but she passes threatening words to Jon, telling him if this ever gets out, she'll know who it started with. The army of the dead show up, and it's a bloodbath, causing the Northerners and Dany's army to flee into separate areas of the North. The Ironborn and Southern Kingdoms answer the call to fight, but Cersei has King's Landing still on lockdown. While the people of Westeros are dying, she's keeping her armies healthy and her people in captivity. Daenerys is furious over this injustice, but can't do anything about it without eliminating the Night King first. The season ends with the final confrontation with the Walkers and the Night King. She's cornered by him and almost dies by his hand, only for Jon to show up last minute and with a final duel, the one we should have had and were robbed of, finally defeats the Night King, stopping his armies and completing the prophecy of the prince who was promised. Or so we think. Even though the dead have been defeated, winter is still here and the land is stuck in darkness. Maybe the prophecy wasn't referring to the Night King. End of Season 8. Yep, I'm splitting it up into 2 seasons. I know I just said I wanted to focus on Daenerys, but I think the Night King and the consequences of facing such an existential threat should have huge overarching consequences for the rest of the story. And the only way to convey that for me is by making 2 seasons, or at very least splitting the last season into 2 parts. 6 episodes for the Night King story and 6 episodes for the Mad Queen story. So at the start of this next half of the story, we see devastating consequences of the Night King's terror across Westeros. Thousands of people have died across the north, and thousands of armies from the south have died. They are weak, broken, traumatized, and tired. However, Daenerys says to Jon that now is the time to uphold his end of the deal and help her reclaim the throne. But after some time apart due to the war and reuniting with his family, Jon has become hesitant to help Dany in her quest. His loyalty is to the north, and it should have always been to the north. A celebration happens for the soldiers and kingdoms that fought in the battle. It's a night of celebration, but suddenly in the middle of the night, they are ambushed by a massive portion of Cersei's army. Their technological weaponry is now the most dangerous threat in Westeros. After that blow, the tired but now angered armies join her in her fight against Cersei. Over the course of the season, with battles and a growing distrust over Dany's harsh decision-making, her most trusted advisors are becoming afraid of her actions. Things come to a head when rumors start spreading across the kingdoms about Jon's heritage. She warns him about the consequences of this and schedules a public trial for Jon. She yells to the crowd, "Someone here spread the rumors. Who was it?" In the heat of the moment, she orders the execution of the members of the crowd. But just before Drogon fires, Varys steps up and says he did it. He sacrifices himself for the good of the realm before giving one last look at Jon. Jon afterwards confronts Daenerys about this action. She almost killed the people. Daenerys said she was never going to do it. She knew who it was the whole time. She just wanted him to confess. She begins using the tactics of fear rather than love and admiration. As they prepare for the final battle, Tyrion tells Dany that when Cersei surrenders, they need to have a trial for her. The people are scared and they need to know she is a just and fair ruler. She agrees. The final fight at King's Landing happens, but during the fight, Rhaegal is shot out of the air. She lays waste to Euron's fleet, and they take over the city. Cersei rings the bells for surrender, but after all the betrayal, after all the damage Cersei has done, Daenerys begins laying waste to the rest of her armies. She goes to the Red Keep and reduces it down to rubble, killing Cersei inside. It's that night, and Daenerys orders the city to come to the steps of the castle, where she says they are now free from Cersei's tyranny. They have been liberated by her, and they will be under her protection. The Unsullied and Dothraki are cheering for their queen's victory, while the people are terrified at the lengths of her destruction. She orders everyone to bend the knee, and they do, but it's out of terror and fear. Jon looks at Daenerys, and he's shocked by how she can't see what she's become. Tyrion and Jon have a similar talk to what they had in the final episode, about how she's dangerous and how it could cost the lives of millions. In the throne room, Jon has a conversation with Daenerys, and it pretty much plays out the same as it did in the original. Jon is trying to get through to her that she showed no mercy. People are scared of her. She tells Jon they will come around to it because she knows what is good.
What about everyone else?
They don't get to choose.
He tells her he loves her before embracing in a kiss and stabbing her in the heart. Over the next few weeks, winter has started to go away, and Dany's army is outnumbered by the people of Westeros. They want justice for Dany, but they simply don't have the manpower at this point. They come to a council and agree to sail back to Essos. Grey Worm, with the guidance of Missandei, promises to leave a better legacy over there than they did here. The council loves the idea of Jon as king, but Tyrion brings up the idea of Daenerys' wish of breaking the wheel. Maybe they can honor that by getting rid of the Iron Throne altogether. Every kingdom will be independent as they were thousands of years ago, and they will help each other in the decades to come to rebuild. It's an uncertain future they head into with this concept, but hopefully there is some form of light at the end of the tunnel. A dream of spring. To be honest, in this rewrite, I didn't change too much of what happens in the original season. I think the biggest issues were not allowing the plot to breathe and her easily killing thousands of people. Fix those two things, and you got something solid to work with. And like I said, if I did a complete rewrite of the final season with all the additional characters and plot lines, it would have been drastically different from this. But I think this serves as a much more logical way of not only showing the long-term consequences of the Night King, but also showing Dany's descent into darkness. What David and Dan tried to do was just too much too fast. People often ask what made them do this to arguably the most anticipated series finale ever, and to that I say, beats me. I think it was a mixture of ego, incompetence, and burnout, if I had to guess. If you want a future in writing and want to create a tale with tragic outcomes, I would suggest both Game of Thrones and Succession. You should have an understanding of what to do and what not to do. If there's one thing, though, I can take away from Game of Thrones, it's this: never rush your art.